wanna talk? So let's talk. Yeah. Talk. You wanna talk? You gotta talk, you need to talk. News talk.
I talk, you talk to Solomon. I talk, you talk to Solomon. Yeah, let's talk to Solomon. Talk to Solomon.
You gotta talk.
Welcome back, my friends. It's Talk to Solomon time. Some technical difficulties, but we think we've gotten past them. Appreciate your being with us. I'm Stan Solomon, my co-host.
Chief Steve.
And also my co-host from Parts Unknown, Brent Johnson, the freedomradio.us, internationally known expert on the Constitution. Brent, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I know where I am. I'm in the Southern Hemisphere right now.
All right. Well,
it's parts known.
That narrows it down to half the world. All right. And, of course, our guest of honor is Dr. Alan Keyes. I want to spend the last section we have here talking about immigration, legal and otherwise, politics, legal and otherwise, politicians, Republican, Democrat, and otherwise, and just kind of lay this out there. We have a major problem in this country, and that is we have a huge group, someplace between 12 and 20 million people who came here illegally, who have rubbed it in our face, who have robbed us blind legally through the system, who have taken jobs away from Americans who need jobs, citizens, and now we have, the pimp in command who wants to leave our borders unguarded, welcome in another 100 million because that will give the Democrats total control, and make these people front of the line, going to get everything they want to get and then some, and punish us more. Now, they call it other things, but that's, in my opinion, what it is. I'll start with you, Brett. Brent? All right, we'll start with you, Chief.
This is a serious problem, but you've made a point that these are illegal aliens. Illegal is the key word. And I noticed that one of the big arguments in favor of giving the illegals the front-of-the-line status or citizen status is that we don't want to separate them from their families. But with my long career in law enforcement, I've seen this. In every jail and every prison in the United States, people that commit crimes are separated from their families. That's part of the deal. So if you're an illegal alien and committed a crime, get separated from your family is just part of the deal. So, and then the next part about this is the political part. You've touched on here where this is really just a tactic to where the Democrats see a way to gain control forever by taking advantage of us and law-abiding citizens in this country, and so with an illegal act. And so the politicians are sworn and bound to support the Constitution, to support law and order, yet they're spitting on that and turning their backs on that to get their way in politics.
All right, Brent, are you back with us?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
All right,
I think this is interesting what the Senate is supposedly proposing. In that, now you know how I feel. I feel exactly the way Steve feels. These people are criminals. There's no such thing as illegal immigration. Immigration is a lawful process. So if it's illegal, it's not immigration. However, what the Senate is proposing is that the illegal immigrants would have a road to citizenship if they paid all their back taxes, that employers would be prohibited from hiring illegals. A lot of the stuff we've heard before. There's a couple of things missing. Firstly, there has to be some consequence to committing the crime. I don't necessarily know what the best consequence is, but there has to be a consequence more than just paying your back taxes. But the one piece that's missing from any kind of a proposal that I would insist on seeing before I would even consider it would be that those people who do not suffer the consequences of their crimes and pay their back taxes and all that stuff are deported. We catch one, they're out of here. Nobody wants to talk about that. They're deported. They're dropped on a beach someplace in their home country. Let their home country deal with them. Several years ago, I had occasion to show then State Senator Don Rogers from California a like 200-300 page treatment that he read, and he was blown away because he didn't even know about it. The original California Constitution was in 1849, and that Constitution provided that only white males could vote in California. The government went out and they imported a whole bunch of people from Spain, and they somehow got those people to vote for the 1879 California Constitution. In other words, a bunch of people who were not qualified constitutionally to vote for the 1879 Constitution nevertheless did vote for it, legally making it completely invalid. This is the same kind of situation. You're looking to get a bunch of people who are not citizens and authorize them through legislation to vote on matters that affect the law of the land. And it's just the same thing they did in California, just on a bigger scale. And, you know, we should all be very, very concerned about it, especially if there is no vehicle to remove the illegals, deport them back home.
All right, Alan.
Well, said, I think what Brad just said, in general, we need to ponder something, because I listened to the discussion about laws on immigration, and I asked myself, well, okay, they go through all this rigmarole saying that they're putting a law in the books. You will recall, Stan, just to make clear that this approach to things isn't just about what Democrats do. You've got to keep this in mind, I think, because the same process, the same rationalizations, for better or worse, were engaged in during the Reagan years. You do remember that.
1986.
And they ended up passing some legislation, right? And the legislation ended up essentially allowing a whole lot of folks who were illegals to stay in the country on this term and that, and et cetera. It was accompanied, of course, by provisions that were to assure the integrity of our borders, reestablish them, and make sure that we would be able to administer the immigration laws that are actually there in order to serve a public good. And we'll talk about that. That to reassure people that that would happen. Well, it didn't happen, did it, Stan?
Nope. And
this is my problem with all this discussion. And I think it's the problem a lot of Americans have with all this, whether it's the Republican Rubio or whether it's the Democrats and Obama. They're going through the motion of passing laws, but they apparently don't believe in enforcing the law. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
So we are to believe them now when they say we're going to put this law in the books and whatever its provisions, that's what we'll act according to. And yet we now have long experience of decades that that's not at all what they do, and that there is nothing in their behavior at this point that suggests that they are going to do it. I think Americans would take a very different attitude toward this whole issue of immigration if they didn't feel at a very fundamental level that the elites who have taken over the government aren't at all committed to the integrity of America's borders, to protecting the sovereignty of the American people, and to maintaining the integrity of our constitutional system of self-government. They know that these people don't believe in this anymore. Republicans, Democrats, a lot of them are part of the same elitist gaggle that is seeking to destroy and overturn government of, by, and for the people. If they weren't, Stan, they wouldn't just be talking about how this affects people and jobs and all of this. They would read their oath. And the oath they take says they are to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Does bringing in a whole bunch of people and letting a whole bunch of people come into the country illegally, putting them in a situation where they have already contravened the law, where they have lived for a long time in gray areas that keep them under the radar of the law and without any particular respect for the law, where they have not, in fact, been engaged in a conscious effort to cease being what they were and become American citizens, taking on the task of self-government in a way that respects and accords with the constitutional responsibilities of the citizens. Is that happening? Has that happened? As a matter of fact, the contrary has happened. Under the influence and pressure of these self-same elites, we have seen our education system abandon the business of really educating people to become American citizens, to have a knowledge of the history and the principles and what is entailed in the Constitution. Add that to the mix, and you actually see a problem of unlawful entry into the country, where the people who are coming into the country then become a source of degradation for the political culture that supports the Constitution. Not because they're bad people or this, but because we have been making no effort to do anything else. And in fact, our schools have abandoned that effort where Americans are concerned, and you and I both know it. All of this then lends credence to what I think is the underlying truth. This isn't about immigration. It's about a tactic intended further to weaken the sovereignty of the people, undermine the implementation of the Constitution, create a citizen body with a significant element in it that is ignorant of and careless about both the responsibilities and the pride of citizenship, so that these elites can continue what they are so obviously doing, overturning constitutional self-government in America. That's the real point here. That's what they don't want us to focus on. It's not about immigration. It's about destroying self-government. And to put the final icing on the cake, you do remember, I don't know if y'all talked about it, but they have issued another one of those things where they're trying to tell the law enforcement people who's liable to be a problem. And guess who they've defined as a problem in their latest junk coming out? They've said that people who talk a lot about and believe in individual rights and self-government are somehow to be identified as folks who are prone to terrorism and disorder and all this. Can you believe that, Stan?
I absolutely can believe it.
To me, that's what we need to focus on. The immigration issue is about undermining the sovereignty of the American people. To be done economically, as we've already seen, but also to be done in a way that introduces a large number of people into the population who have no stake in the constitutional system, because we have abandoned the education process that helps people to understand what it's all about. And
they come from a socialist background. That's what they know. It's what they're comfortable with, and they have a long family history, almost without exception, of surviving because of what government gives them or allows them to have, and that's all they know, and they're not taught anything different. Your point is well made. I want to just shout and holler and yell, not that I do that, but the reality is that all of the programs that government talks about, and by the way, Rush Limbaugh must be listening to this show because he's using your terminology now, Alan. He's calling them the ruling class and the elitists, and he said Republican or Democrat, they have no interest in anything other than securing their own piece of power. So maybe he's listening in on the show, I don't know. But the fact is, one of the things that I want to scream about every time I hear someone talk about whatever, one-legged people that are left-handed, that anytime government talks about any person or group of people in need, they're not talking about them, they're talking about government. That 85 to 90% of the money that they take in, they benefit from. 10% or less benefits anyone, whether it's the one-legged people that are left-handed or any other group. And there's an article here about how the head of the NAACP, Ben Jealous, who's a complete moron, says, guess what, folks? Black people in this country are worse off now than they were when President Obama was elected. So are white people, by the way. So are Hispanic people. So are Asian people. So are one-legged, left-handed people. Everyone's worse off because this person has done a terrible job. But all of a sudden, it's like someone woke him out of a deep slumber to say, hey, unemployment was 12.7, and now it's 14. Hello, Chief.
As long as any group is going to be supporting someone who wants to exterminate them, I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. The NAACP and the black community are getting exactly what they asked for, Barack Obama in misery.
Brett?
I have to agree with Steve there. I have to agree with Steve. America was founded by rugged individualists, people who are willing to do the work, work hard, knowing that the harder they work, the more fruit of their labor they get to keep. Because they came from places where that wasn't true. Didn't matter if you were in the lower classes, if you were a commoner, it didn't matter how hard you worked, you couldn't own property. You didn't get to keep what you earned, and everything was taken from you. So America was a beacon of possibilities. And that rugged individualism that was at the foundation of America has been eroded to the point that everybody is looking for their piece of the government pie. The government doesn't have anything. Government has what it takes from you and me. The government has only what it takes from the people. So the more the government gives out, the more the government takes. And by asking for more and more and more, all they're asking for is for more to be taken from the people that have and given to the people that don't have. And very frankly, that's un-American. And the people who are seeking a better life through government gifts, in my mind, are un-American, and they don't deserve anything. It's immoral, and frankly, it's unconstitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution that lets the government go out and endlessly take from the haves and give to the have-nots. The problem is, as has been well said before I say it, that in a society in which the government takes from Peter and gives to Paul, that government will always have the support of Paul.
Alan?
Well, I love listening to Brett, and it brings to mind, of course, that wonderful Maggie Thatcher moment, right? Where she pointed out, I think it was Maggie Thatcher, said the thing about socialism is that pretty soon you run out of other people's money. And the reason for that, obviously, is that the approach you are taking is an approach that destroys productivity. It destroys the incentive that people have to make the most of their situation. I think this has been one of the great keys to the success of America. I've often compared it to what happens in a nuclear reaction, right, where we unleash this enormous power. How is it done? By recognizing the great power that was locked in each particular atom, so that what had been considered the little thing became the source of this enormous power once you respected its potential. I think that's a perfect analogy for the success of America in economic terms. We unlocked the potential of the individual. And the result was the equivalent of a nuclear explosion of economic power that took what we had in America and transformed it into a successful result. And it's not just because we're a country endowed with great rivers and land and all of this. Because I've been all over the world. I've seen lots of places mired in poverty that had gems lying on the ground and that had fertile fields and that had rushing rivers and so forth and so on. Africa, Asia, elsewhere, steeped in poverty because they were still living according to the old rule that said the country exists for the sake of a few people and their servants. And obviously, since you don't need any more than that, you don't care what happens to the others. And they can be fired in poverty. They can be destroyed because you've taken care of yourselves. That's the mentality that has taken over our sick elites. And that is leading to the destruction of our country. And it's the exact reverse of what this country was founded about. Final point for me, always, though, is that I wrote a piece, and I would invite folks to go read it. I think it's one of the best things I've ever written on the meaning of unalienable right. What that phrase means, what it implies. It was occasioned by Obama's perverse references to the Declaration of Independence at his second swearing-in ceremony. I think we ought to call it that because, of course, the minute he takes the oath, he is forsworn because he doesn't believe a single thing in the Constitution. So the notion he's going to uphold, protect, defend it, that's a lot of bunk. So he's forsworn the minute he swears. So at his second forswearing in, he gave the speech. And he opens it, quoting the words of the Declaration, "We are created equal, God's gift," and all this. You read it over cursorily, and it sounds good. And then you think about what he's actually saying, and actually discarding basic principles of the Constitution that are stated in the Declaration, discarding the notion of unalienable rights, talking about an empty, phony promise of freedom, and doing it all in order to justify the complete consolidation of power in the hands of a totalitarian and absolutist government. It's really something to behold. But the actual doctrine of unalienable rights is a doctrine that respects this truth. God endowed each and every individual with that little voice of conscience. As people respond to his will within themselves and go out to do what's necessary to preserve themselves, to develop things for their family, to build communities in which a same sense of responsibility will prevail, no government, no authority has the power to crush and oppress and destroy what they do and deprive them of its fruits. So it refutes the whole premise that is at the heart of all the oligarchic and elitist government down through the history of the world. And what particularly galls me is that these jokers want to now act as if the impoverishment and destruction of the multitudes of the people, for the sake of line in the pocket and serving the grand ambitions of these self-worshipping elites, that's something to do with America. It has nothing to do with America except its destruction. And I think it's time we woke up to that. And so I would have to say that, looking at what's going on, Americans really need to wake up. And it's what I've been trying to do, to get folks to see back to the heart of what this country is really about and recognize that our economic success was not, emphatically not, built on government power and government interference. It was built on exactly what the Declaration would expect: reverence for God-endowed rights. So that people, acting according to the sense of responsibility that exercise of right involves, built families and built communities and built farms and built enterprises where they took the first responsibility for the welfare of themselves and their family and of their communities. We walk away from that, as these socialist jokers in both the Republican and Democrat elites are now encouraging us to do, and we destroy the basis for that dignity, that sense of decent pride that is in fact a key characteristic that I think people have come from all over the world to America to enjoy.
All right, on that point, we're going to call it a show, but I do want to give everyone an opportunity to just kind of sum up their thoughts for this year coming up, 2014, because it's a scary time. But I'll start with you, Brent.
Well, I do think it's a scary time, and I think that we talk about it a lot on this show, and sometimes we revisit the same subjects over and over because that's what you need to do. Sometimes you need to have repetition to really get the point across. I think the fundamental, singular, first issue that must be dealt with if America is to be saved. Now, I don't know that it will be saved. I have my doubts that America will survive, because what we have today is America with a K. Okay, I don't know that our free system of self-government will survive, but if it is to survive, the number one thing that must be done is the restoration of the standard moral background provided by a collective faith in God. And I don't care what the law says. As far as I'm concerned, the laws of man are subservient to the laws of God. So I don't care what the government says about you can't do this, you can't do that. I don't care what the schools say about it. I don't care what the state laws say about it. I disregard those laws. I ignore those laws. If we are to save our country, we have to reinstill in the people a sense that there is a God and that there are certain basic fundamental moral rights and wrongs by which we collectively agree to live. If we don't do that, I don't think anything else can be corrected.
Well said. Chief?
The Democrats treat elections like a war, and the Republicans treat them like a debate. I want to just close with some remarks that was made by Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, who is the hero of the Gettysburg War, and he told this to his men the night before the Battle of Little Round Top, of the last day of the Gettysburg War. And he said, we're not fighting this war over land. We're fighting over an ideal that men are not judged by who their father was, their economic stature, where they came from, or the color of their skin. We're fighting for everyone to be equal, and everyone will be judged on their own merit. That's the America that I want, that I believe in, I'm fighting for today. I hope you are too.
Well said. And Alan?
Sorry. I would just want to suggest to folks that as they're listening to what's being said these days by our pals, politicians, and all this, they try to remember that the challenge that we're faced with right now, contrary to what they all say. I was thinking of this today, reading Jim DeMint's statement as he takes over Heritage Foundation. And he's been a man who's taken many good positions, but he still insisted on acting as if our discussion should be about problem solving and how much better conservatives are about problem solving. That's the key trick that is destroying our country right now. Because our country isn't about solving problems. Our country was about establishing liberty and justice for all. Our country was about pursuing an understanding of what that meant in terms of individual rights and the sense of decent responsibility, God-fearing responsibility in every individual. So I just want them to remember a simple phrase. Okay? We don't just have problems to solve, we have a free country to save and restore. And that ought to be our main objective right now, our main concern. We shouldn't let them tear our minds apart with 1,000 problems that they will only make worse, while they take the precious truth that is the ground and foundation for our free and prosperous way of life and discard it in order to make us again what people have been throughout the history of the world, slaves to a little handful of tyrants.
On that note, we will wish you all a wonderful week. We will see you next week. Thank you, Dr. Keys. Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Chief. And thank you, America.